My name is Clara Whitmore, and the moment my mother called the house I inherited, our house, I realized she had already decided it no longer belonged to me. She stood comfortably in the living room, her purse resting on the kitchen counter and her shoes marking the hardwood floors my grandmother had lovingly polished every Sunday. "It's only fair," she said calmly. "This house should help the family. Your sister needs a stable place to live." My sister sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone without saying a word, as if she were simply waiting for me to hand her the keys. I didn't argue. I didn't remind them that my grandmother had left the house to me, and only me. Years of dealing with my mother had taught me that arguing never changed her mind. It only showed her how hard she had to push. Over the next few weeks, they acted as though they already owned the place. My mother invited contractors over without asking. She measured rooms, discussed remodeling plans, and talked about tearing down walls while I stood only a few feet away. One evening, I overheard her whispering to my sister, "If she refuses, we'll take care of it legally. She can't keep something that belongs to the family." I stayed quiet. Not because I was afraid, but because I had already made my decision. They never noticed the for sale sign until it was far too late. I didn't tell them when the realtor toured the house. I didn't tell them when she admired the original woodwork my grandmother had treasured. When she gently asked, "Are you sure you want to sell?" I simply nodded. Because this was never just about the house. It was about reclaiming my life. The offers came quickly. Serious buyers. Honest buyers. People who saw the home as a place to build memories, not as something they were entitled to take. Within a week, I accepted a full cash offer. The sale was simple. My name was the only one on the deed. My signature was the only one required. As I packed, I carefully wrapped my grandmother's keepsakes, placing each one into boxes filled with dust, memories, and quiet gratitude. Meanwhile, my mother kept making plans. She talked about paint colors. He picked out kitchen cabinets. She even decided where my sister's bedroom would be. I let her dream. She had no idea the closing date was already on the calendar. The morning I handed the keys to the new owner, I didn't cry. I didn't hesitate. I simply walked away. 2 days later, I settled into a small apartment across town. New walls. New locks. New peace. Soon my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Missed calls. Voicemails. Angry text messages. My mother had finally realized something was wrong. By then nothing could be undone. 3 days later she arrived at the old house, not for a visit but to claim it. I watched from across the street inside my car. My sister followed closely behind as my mother confidently walked to the front door. She pulled a spare key from her purse, the one she had secretly taken months earlier. Smiling, she slid it into the lock. Nothing. She tried again. Still nothing. Her smile disappeared. She pounded on the door. A few seconds later it opened. But it wasn't me standing there. A stranger looked at her with a puzzled expression, holding a mug of coffee. My mother's face went pale. "Where's Clara?" she demanded. The man blinked. "I'm sorry, who?" My sister stepped forward. "This is our house." The man frowned before calmly answering, "No. I bought this house." Her words struck my mother like a sudden collapse. From inside my car, I watched every trace of confidence disappear from her face. She called me immediately. I let the phone ring twice before answering. "What did you do?" she demanded. "I sold my house," I said calmly. A long silence followed. Then came the anger. "You had no right." I looked at the front door she had spent weeks pretending belonged to her. "It was never yours." She hung up. But she wasn't finished. That night she came back. Not to apologize. Not to ask questions. She came to take what she still believed was hers. The new owner was already inside, unaware that my mother and sister were once again standing on the porch, whispering to each other as they searched for a way in. Miles away, I was sitting in my apartment when my phone buzzed. It wasn't my mother. It was a security alert. Although the alarm system had been transferred to the new owner during closing, I was still listed as the emergency contact until midnight. The notification was short and clear. Attempted forced entry detected. Authorities have been notified. Asterisk asterisk. I didn't panic. I simply waited. A few minutes later my phone rang again. This time it was my mother. "What did you tell them?" she shouted. I could hear police sirens in the background. "I didn't tell anyone anything," I replied. You think you're so clever? She snapped. That's still our house. I closed my eyes for a moment. No, I said. It never was. She ended the call. Almost without thinking, I opened a local news app. A small headline had already appeared. Police respond to attempted break-in at recently sold home. She had tried to claim a house she never owned. Now the law was involved. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one being threatened. She was. The next morning, I received a call from a police officer. Ms. Whitmore, he said politely, our records show you were the previous owner of the property on Hawthorne Lane. That's correct. There was an attempted unlawful entry last night. The current homeowner identified the individuals as your relatives. I didn't hesitate. They had no permission to be there. A brief silence followed. Understood. That single word closed a door my mother never believed could be shut. An hour later she called again. This time the anger was gone. Only panic remained. They're saying it's trespassing, she whispered. Please. Tell them it was all a misunderstanding. I sat beside the window of my new apartment, watching sunlight spread across the floor. For the first time in years the silence felt peaceful. There's nothing to explain, I answered. You're doing this to your own family? I let the silence speak for me. Because family doesn't threaten lawsuits to steal your inheritance. Family doesn't try to force their way into someone else's home. She began to cry. Not because she had lost the house. Because she finally had to face the consequences of her own choices. For the first time in my life, I didn't rush to comfort her. This time the law wasn't protecting her. It was protecting me. 2 days later she made one final attempt. Not with threats. With guilt. She showed up outside my apartment without warning, standing in the hallway as if she still had the right to walk into my life. Her eyes were red with frustration. You've proved your point, she said softly. Now stop this. I remained in the doorway. I wasn't trying to prove anything, I replied. I made a decision. She stepped closer. Your sister has nowhere stable to live now. That house was supposed to solve everything. For a moment I said nothing. Then I realized the truth I had ignored for years. It had never been about giving my sister a home. It had always been about taking mine. You tried to pressure me into giving away my inheritance, I said calmly. And you called that a family solution. Her expression hardened. We were only protecting what belonged to us, she insisted. I slowly shook my head. It never belonged to you. Silence settled between us. For the first time in my life she had nothing to use against me. No authority. No guilt. No control. She was standing in front of a boundary she could no longer cross. Her eyes wandered past me into my small apartment. It wasn't luxurious. It wasn't the house my grandmother had left me. But it was peaceful. It was mine. You've changed, she whispered. I met her gaze without hesitation. No, I replied. I just stopped letting you decide who I am. She stared at me for a moment, searching for the daughter who always gave in. She couldn't find her. Without another word, she turned and walked away. This time I didn't watch her leave. She no longer had the power to take anything from me. A week later, an envelope arrived in my mailbox. It wasn't from my mother. It was from her attorney. I opened it expecting another threat, another demand, another attempt to claim what was never hers. Instead, I found something I never expected. A complete withdrawal. They were abandoning every legal claim. No lawsuit. No challenge. No argument. At the bottom of the letter, written in cold legal language, was the truth my mother would never admit. No legal ownership. No standing. No valid claim. Asterisk asterisk. I set the letter on the table and quietly smiled. For years she had convinced me that everything I had depended on her approval. Now even her own lawyer had confirmed the truth. She had no power over me. That evening my sister called. Her voice was unusually quiet. You didn't have to go this far. I let out a small laugh. You tried to take everything from me. Silence filled the line. Finally she spoke. Mom thought you'd give in. Like you always did. I closed my eyes. I don't anymore. She didn't argue. There was nothing left to say. Deep down they both understood that the version of me they had controlled for years no longer existed. And she wasn't coming back. A month later I drove past Hawthorne Lane one final time. Not to relive the past. Not to reclaim the house. only to close that chapter of my life. The home looked different now. Fresh curtains hung in the windows. Flowers had begun to bloom where my grandmother once cared for her rose garden. It was no longer filled with conflict. It was simply someone's home again. I didn't stop the car. I didn't need to. Because I finally understood something my grandmother had tried to teach me all along. The house was never the greatest inheritance she left behind. Freedom was. Just then my phone buzzed. A message from my mother appeared on the screen. "We miss you." Not "I'm sorry." Not "I was wrong." Not "please forgive me." Just a few words pretending that distance was the only thing standing between us. I looked at the message for a moment. Then I locked my phone and placed it on the passenger seat. Some bridges don't collapse in flames. They simply disappear one choice at a time. I drove home, to my apartment, my future, and the life I had finally chosen for myself. There were no more threats. No more guilt. No more sacrificing my peace to satisfy someone else's entitlement. My mother tried to take my inheritance. Instead, she gave me something far more valuable. The freedom to live my own life.